So, what is positive psychology? It sounds a little bit soft and fluffy, right? Okay. Effectively, positive psychology is moving the field of psychology away from this kind of historical focus on getting people with mental ill health up to being normal, quote unquote, and moving towards where we want to focus on getting people from baseline to thriving. We've spent a lot of time and energy in both the veterinary space, but also sort of in the wider psychology profession, focusing on how do we make people who aren't okay okay. And that is an important goal. And we'll talk about the balance later. But also, what about if being okay shouldn't be enough? If it shouldn't be enough to just aim to survive our profession, we might want to do a bit better than that. And how do we shift the dial to thriving? And that is what the science of positive psychology is all about, is how do we move away from just wanting to not be bad and towards being well. And that is why when we come all the way back to the definitions of well-being, it's actually about being better than just fine. All right. So there's quite a lot of science around this space now. And one of the pretty popular models is the PERMA-H model, or the PERMA model. They've just had the H added recently. And what that is the PERMA model of positive psychology is really saying these are the things that we believe that people who thrive have a lot of in their life, as opposed to people who are just okay. All right. So, what we're going to look at is how do we get more of that thriving piece in our lives? So, there's a couple of different elements. PERMA stands for positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meanings, accomplishments, and the new H being added is health. Because, as we talked about before, physical health is really quite clearly linked to your well-being, but also mental ill health detracts from well-being, which kind of seems obvious, but it's important to note. All right, but to really focus in on that PERMA model, what we're really talking about is how do we create an environment where the good things are not only more prevalent in our life, but they're the things that we focus on. How do we be, we talked earlier about noticing moments of compassion satisfaction as opposed to just dumping them in with, oh, it was a day I did some euthanasias. How do we actually start to go, well, those things happened and I'm going to give them some attention, because what you focus on is what you get. And if all we focus on is the negative narratives, then that's where we spend a lot of our time. So, engagement, remember, we talked about relationships as well as being one of the most crucial things to being well. Having meaning in our lives. Now, we're very blessed in our profession that most of us, we have this built in. Sometimes when we lose our connection to our meaning, sometimes, for example, when we get promoted out of technical roles and we're not on the ground, hands-on, seeing the lives we're changing so much, it can be harder to connect to that meaning and why are we here and what are we achieving. So we have to do the shift to mentally making note of those things. And accomplishments, we do need to feel like we are making a difference, like we are doing something, we are progressing. And this is especially true for the stereotype of the veterinarian who, works their butt off to get the highest grades on the planet, to get into vet school, and worked their butt off to be right at the top of the class and really kick ass and a very difficult thing. And then being a new grad is this huge learning curve of immense amount of constant accomplishments, and you thirst this and you thirst that, and now I did that thing unsupervised, and then we kind of get to mid-career and you're like, well, nobody clapped when I did my first cesarean today. Nobody noticed that I did a really cool ultrasound and I found a tumor. We're not marking the moments as much as we become more competent, and we no longer have to celebrate those huge milestones, or the milestones don't feel as huge. So this is a really great model for just, I guess, putting at the top of your mind, these are the things that help us thrive. And so, how we create more of these things in our lives is what's important. And now, this is the point at where a lot of people say, well, is that sounding a bit toxic positivity? Like, are we just focusing on the positive and, trying to kind of manifest good things and ignoring all the bad? And I want to be really clear that positive psychology does not advocate for ignoring bad things and only focusing on good things. In fact, that's not helpful at all. There's really clear evidence that, forcing people to just think positively if they're in a negative headspace actually makes them more negative. So I am not at all advocating, and neither is the science of positive psychology, for this whole movement of just look at the silver lining and just focus on the good and that sort of stuff. What it is instead is about acknowledging both sides of that coin. There is work that needs to be done to acknowledge that there are negative things going on and that we're not always okay, and we need to do the work on the below the baseline spectrum as well. But it's saying that if we spend all of our time just managing the negative, we might not spend enough time being more mindful of the positive. Okay, so the best analogy I've heard for this, which I really love, in the book Lead to Thrive, we talk about this analogy of a garden, and I'm not a gardener, so it feels a bit soft and fluffy for me, but it is a really nice analogy where we talk about if you are just focusing on not not being bad, then if you look at that like a garden where you're constantly trying to keep on top of the weeds, all right, and you pull all the weeds out whenever they pop up, and you make sure you spray some anti-weed spray, and making sure that whenever one pops up, you crop it out, and you're really keeping on top of the weeds. And it's an important endeavor in having a thriving garden. But if you get to the end of the season and all you've really done is pull the weeds, then have you planted any flowers? And how are you is that a good enough garden? A garden without weeds? Or do you want a garden with flowers as well? So the art of positive psychology is about acknowledging the weeds, seeing them as part of our job, but noticing, do you know what? If there's a few weeds poking up here and there, but we've got this lush, thriving, colorful flower garden, they're okay. It's okay to have some bad stuff. It's okay to have things go wrong and things not be all right some of the time, because on average, we're flourishing. And I really like that approach and that analogy of it's okay to have the bad things, and we're not ignoring them and we're not pushing them aside. We're going, they're a part of life. We work on them, we work about them, but they shouldn't be our only focus, or we actually miss a huge part of what being well is all about.